Are you still worried about the Apple M2 chip? You need to watch this video. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. If you are watching this video, you are probably aware of all of the controversy surrounding Apple's M2 chip. And this comes off the back of some testing done by Max Tech. Basically, they found that the SSD in the 256GB version of the M2 MacBook Pro is slower than the M1 version. They also found out that the M2 MacBook Pro throttles much worse than the M1 version. So if you put it under very heavy load, it slows down the CPU very significantly. Now, the internet has gone absolutely mad about this issue. I've made a video about it. The Everyday Dad's made a video about it. Max Tech have made loads of follow-up videos about it. Everyone has just lost the plot a little bit, to be honest. And I thought it was time to get the full inside story about what's going on, which is why I invited Max Tech on this channel to talk more about their testing, and that is exactly what they did. We're also joined on the call by Rob, my co-host on the 8 or 16 podcast, because the full-length version of this interview is going to be on the podcast. I'll put a link in the description so you can subscribe to that. So this is a cut-down, shortened version of the interview, but I've put all the best bits into it. Trust me, you do not want to miss this. We'll get straight onto this because I know it's been it's been an interesting couple of weeks, hasn't it? For I think everyone in the Apple space. We operate in very different ends of it, Vadim, as you probably know. You guys are just sailing away. You near your million subscribers, which is amazing.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a lot of work, a lot of time.
I suppose for anyone who's been living under a rock, I think anyone who's listening to this podcast probably knows what we're talking about. But do you want to perhaps just give us a kind of quick synopsis, if you like, of your findings with the M2 chip?
We had WWDC. Apple revealed their M2 Max with their M2 MacBook Air, M2 MacBook Pro, which they're reusing the same chassis, which is a little bit disappointing, but they're going to do what they're going to do. And then we got them in and we started testing them. And the first thing we did was we tested the SSD speed, and it was really shocking because we saw, the SSD in some cases was 2 times slower in Blackmagic disk tests, especially for the read speed, which actually was 2 times slower. And we mentioned in that first video that this could lead to slower performance for the virtual memory swap. So we ended up testing this, and right away we noticed drastic performance losses for the memory swap, where we opened up 10 Chrome tabs. And then we started noticing that, wait a minute, the M2 is slower than the M1. Like, how is that possible? For me personally, I was like, man, that is disappointing. Like, they made this new M2 chip. It's faster in a lot of ways, 18% multi-core, 35% GPU. But then, they took away one of those NAND chips, and it basically is ruining the performance, even with only 10 Chrome tabs open, and then we did a little bit further testing where we opened up an extra app. Like, let's say if you're running Final Cut, let's open up Lightroom in the background. And that led to some really big performance losses in some cases. And people requested us in our YouTube comments to test out the 512 gig model with 8 gigs of RAM. So we went out, we got one of those, and that way we were getting rid of the RAM difference. So same RAM, just the SSD, just with the 512 gig SSD, no apps in the background. We were getting tests that are 15% faster. And that's a pretty big difference. That's almost like the whole 18% of the M2. And that kind of shows that the M2 chip is being limited drastically by that base 256 gig single NAND chip.
What do you think this means for the M2 MacBook Air? Because the impression I get from my videos and the people that have swarmed into my comments is that they're kind of, I think the M2 MacBook Pro has been lost a little bit in this whole narrative. I think a lot of people that I've seen on my channel anyway, I don't know if it's the same on yours, but they're coming to me now saying, I've either cancelled my M2 MacBook Air order, or I don't think I should buy that computer anymore. What do I do? Because it sounds like it's going to be slower. What are your thoughts on how these tests relate to, I know you haven't tested it yet, or I assume you haven't. How do they relate to the MacBook Air?
If people start testing it, it has the same issues, and people start comparing the M1 MacBook Air to the M2 with some multitasking workloads, it's slower. That would also be pretty disappointing. I don't know how many people would notice it, but you were served a product that you thought was supposed to be an upgrade in every way, but it's not. It's actually a downgrade in the SSD, which could also lead to a downgrade in performance that kind of takes away the whole point of the M2 chip.
People have picked up on this headline about, oh, Max Tech tried to export 8K Canon RAW footage on an M2 MacBook Pro and wondered why it got unhappy. And it's like, well, no, that's not all they did. There's 2.5 hours of content on this where you have demonstrated in multiple scenarios how even, a basic user is going to feel it.
So like my point of view is that I've always been very optimistic with Apple Silicon. With the M1 Ultra, I was very excited that they were combining two M1 Max chips. When this M2 MacBook Pro came out and we actually saw some issues, that's when I started being negative about it, because I'm like, man, how could Apple make that decision? I mean, I know that there's supply chain issues, inflationary pressures where their profit margins are getting squeezed, and all these other companies. And I can tell that Apple is trying to save their profit margins as much as possible. But I think that it was a mistake to kind of overmarket the M2 chip so much, but at the same time, cut away one of the most fundamental pieces of the laptop, which adds to the performance.
Creator to creator, we can be our own worst enemies with this. I've done something similar, so about on a much smaller scale, I need to kind of point out. In 2021, last year, I wrote an article on Medium which had the title "Apple should cancel the Apple TV." That was basically it. And Rob's grimacing because it completely it exploded. It's to this day, actually, it's my most popular Medium article. And the comment section went absolutely mental. And if you dig into the article, actually, there's a reason I was saying that, obviously, and there's a bit more to it than that. But I went down that sensationalist approach. I think it's very easy to get sucked into that way of reporting this stuff. And I know you and I, Vadim, have spoken about this on Twitter, and it felt very sensationalist, I think. A lot of hyperbole, and a lot of the detail gets lost. And what's happened, so as soon as I did my kind of reaction video to this on Monday, which was a very last minute video that I made, I mentioned this on my newsletter this week, it was as though you get these people who are vehemently opposed to Apple in one way or another, and that they're very much waiting for Apple to slip up with something. And as soon as they slip up, it's like the gates open and they come flying in. One side agreeing with me, saying, yeah, don't worry about it, it doesn't matter, it's all kind of blown out of proportion. And the other side was, Apple are terrible. They're kind of pulling the wool over our eyes. This M2 chip's rubbish. No one should buy it. There's no middle ground, or very, very little of it. I still maintain personally that probably not the M2 MacBook Pro. That's a weird laptop. But the M2 MacBook Air is going to sell like hotcakes. And the vast majority of people, if I asked my mum, she's got no idea about SSD speeds, and she would buy that computer and love it. But there's just this other group of people on the internet who seem unnecessarily poorly influenced by content that you guys put out there, and perhaps that I put out there as well. That's what bothers me, really.
I think what might happen, which might be causing this, is a lot of people just read the headline. I think the SSD problem is the big problem. Now, the thermal throttling one, that was something we came across. We were testing the M2 MacBook Pro versus the 14-inch M1 Pro. And this Canon test, 8K RAW, is one that we've actually done in the past a lot. So we were testing it, and then we discovered, like, whoa, 108 degrees Celsius. Like, we haven't seen that before. That's crazy.
In all the noise, people don't point out that actually you offered some very, that you caveated everything. You were like, well, okay, there may be various reasons behind this. Perhaps Final Cut needs an update to take better advantage of the new ProRes encode decode engine in the M2.
The SSD issue, that's the more important one. And I wish more people paid attention to that. But a lot of the attention is going to the thermal throttling. I think what happened, which on my part I could have done better, was to add in the disclosure higher up, or perhaps in the first tweet.
If you'd put that right at the top, if that's the first thing you see when you pick up the newspaper, people will hang on to that. But it wasn't, like you say, it was buried down there. I missed that. From my perspective, I always think of the consumer, and I think of what I call the normal user, which sounds a bit derogatory, but it's not, because I count myself as a normal user when I'm doing my normal stuff with my MacBook Air, for example. My worry is that if you think about my mum again, for example, if she hears this, the only thing she's going to hear is the new MacBooks are slower and they overheat. That'll be it. That'll be as far as that headline goes. What Apple has done is there's something not right there. I agree, but there's reasons for it. And because they're so tight-lipped, this is the frustrating thing about them. We don't know why they chose that one NAND chip. Who knows? They'll never tell us probably. But my concern is that none of that gets through, and the consumer, the regular consumer, the normal user, decides not to buy something which would have been a fantastic purchase. And what I get, if I kind of give that opinion to someone on my comments, their response is, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, because what they're buying something that Apple has said is doing something that it's not doing. It's not as fast as Apple is claiming it is. That's all that matters. And my response to that personally is that's irrelevant, I'm afraid. They've bought something, it works for them, it's the best laptop they've ever bought, and they're happy.
Obviously, the M2 MacBook Air is going to have the M2 chip, and it's not going to have a fan. So I guess we're going to have to see how that performs. But for the M2 MacBook Pro, if you're just doing 100% CPU, it handles it fine. It's when you start mixing 100% CPU with heavy on the GPU, that's when the problems come out. And I think there's a small amount of use cases that happens. More people should be buying the M2 MacBook Air, because in reality, everyday use, you're experiencing the new design, you're experiencing the better speakers, the better display. Unfortunately, a lot of people just went out and said, hey, it overheats all the time. And that's not the message that I wanted to relay. I just wanted to relay, hey, we tested a really extreme 8K raw test, and we noticed severe thermal throttling, which is true, but that's like, a small, I guess, use case, more advanced use case.
Same for me, really. I went for the jugular with it because I read your first 2 or 3 tweets and just went for it. So same thing. I should have watched all the videos. I should have read all of your tweets and read that disclaimer. I had to rely on Rob to kind of bring me up to speed, really, after I'd made my video. So I do think as content creators, we do have to look in the mirror occasionally. But hopefully this will give both of our audiences, which are very, very different. My audience is so different to Max Tech, but they both need the information they need. The problem we have is that there's this battle going on between the two of them, and I'm not suggesting we can fix this. It will never be fixed, probably. A bit like Windows versus Mac. But I think hopefully if they watch this and get both sides and see what's actually going on behind the scenes and the effort you guys go into it, and the fact that there are caveats, and there's a lot more to this than the big headlines, hopefully maybe that will kind of get a bit more. All I want personally is just decent debate about it like this. That's all. It's not nice having those conversations in comments threads. So let's try and change the world, Vadim. It's not too big. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed that. I'd love to know what you thought about that interview in the comments, so please do get involved. Are you more informed now? Have you still got questions? Let us know down below. And thank you once again to Vadim and Max Tech for getting involved in this interview. If you want to see my reaction, my original reaction to this whole M2 thing, keep watching for a link to that video at the end of this one. Cheers.